We appreciate you joining us for another episode of Ears to Hear. Today we're going to be thinking about something that seems to have no place on a religious podcast. We're going to be thinking about Bitcoin, of all things. It has been in the news quite a bit this week. On the NASDAQ, one of the first exchange-traded funds launched, immediately climbing near the top in volume traded for the session. There was a lot of interest in it. A few days before that, though, a fellow named Jamie Dimon, who is the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, made headlines saying that he thought Bitcoin was worthless. Now, needless to say, this is not a financial podcast, but I would suggest there are lessons we can learn from this topic. Or more to the point, we can look at people's ideas and mindsets and make a spiritual application. So, come on with us, let's give it a try on this week's episode of Ears to Hear. Thanks for joining us. Again, we appreciate you joining us for this week's podcast. We are going to be talking about Bitcoin, Andrew.
Yeah, not really what you'd expect from us, typically.
Yeah, I know. We're probably the only religious, air quote, podcast who's ever spoken about Bitcoin.
Oh, I'm sure if you dug deep enough, you could find something. I mean, there's got to be. I feel like, though, this episode needs one of our trademark disclaimers.
I'm not a financial planner.
This is not financial advice. Do not take anything we say as financial advice.
What is on that list of things that we are not? We are not financial planners.
We're not pharmacists. We're not physicians.
Doctors. We're
not astronomers. I don't know what we've talked about where we need to disclose our non-expertise.
We're not anybody.
That's right.
Is that basically it?
We're not anybody, and by that we're no different than anyone else.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so Bitcoin, and like I said, it's been in the news, and it's been in the news for a long time.
Sure.
Some of the things I said in the intro, it's just been in the news a little bit more the past week or two. So to think about spiritual things, believe it or not, we're not going to really be talking about the pros and cons of Bitcoin.
Because we wouldn't know enough to fill a podcast with that, so...
No, not. And people might prefer that. I don't know.
Look for another podcast if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. I thought we might just start in Matthew chapter 25. In Matthew 25, it's the parable of the talents. And to just look at it as, okay, what is Bitcoin? It is an investment vehicle. That's what it is. Whether it's good or bad, that's a whole nother subject. But it's an investment, and I think sometimes folks sort of take the view, well, investing's bad, that it is nothing but greed, and we'll talk about the greed aspect here in a little bit. But in the parable of the talents, which most folks are real familiar with, it's the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country. He calls the servants. He gave 5 talents, the other 2, and another 1. And verse 16, then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5 talents. Mm-hmm. Man, that's he's doubled his money, so that means he's just a greedy, nefarious individual, right, Andrew?
He's praised by his master, so it's not an act of greed.
Yeah, and he's not greedy. And I understand we're talking about spiritual matters here, but you have this principle of he invested wisely. And we know what the 1 talent man's going to do. He's going to end up burying his talent.
Right. And
history is full of accounts of people who have done exactly that. I actually know someone who literally has money buried in her backyard in various places. She hasn't told any of her relatives where it is, so all the kids and grandkids are kind of nervous about that. But yes, there's plenty of people who they bury money, They shove it in a mattress. It comes from a distrust of banks.
I see that as a
mindset.
fun opportunity to turn one's will into a treasure map. But anyway, continue.
It sounds enjoyable, as long as you have the map and stuff like that. It's not wrong to invest. It's not wrong to invest. There's a principle here, and we think about stewardship. I'm thinking about preaching a sermon at some point or doing something about not being slaves of men.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea of we need to have, that idea of not being slaves of men, which is spoken about in 1 Corinthians, that implies some sort of independence. And investing may be conducive to that. Or we think about retirement and stuff like that.
Yeah.
My point is just investing is not sinful.
Sure. Yeah, I'd say, obviously we come to this with so many topics that we discuss, but it boils down to mindset,
Right.
Investing itself is not a thing where you can draw a line, black and white and say it's sinful or it's not, it's evil or it's not. But if your mindset is wrong, then it could be a problem for you.
Right.
Like anything where in excess, or if you obsess over something or take it too far, if it detracts from your spiritual health, then it could be a problem for someone.
Yep. So inherently, it's not sinful. Like I said, it's mindset. If this is about stewardship, if this is about providing for your family, if this is about, there's a verse in the Old Testament that a righteous man leaves an inheritance for his children's children.
Mm-hmm.
If it's those things, that's one thing. If it's greed, if it's covetousness, if it's the love of money, well, then it is sinful.
Right.
And that's, like I said, that's mindset. And that's 2 Timothy 3, where it talks about, because the love of money, many have pierced themselves through with many sorrows. And as we go through and we talk about this, we're probably going to be thinking about what some of those sorrows may be.
Right. And so far, all of this has been, you could say, the same for conventional stocks or for,
Sure.
Other forms of investing that exist today. I think the reason we wanted to talk about cryptocurrency specifically is because it is a new thing, and it is something that in a way is different than a lot of those other types of investments we've seen before. I guess for the sake of our listeners, if people are not familiar, we should maybe describe a little bit what makes it different.
I guess we should. Go ahead.
Just the bare minimum, if possible. Essentially, it's non-commodity. It's all digital currency. So it's currency that all exists in a digital space and is traded via the internet and between internet connected devices. That's probably as deep as I could possibly get in terms of explanation, but that's kind of why it's different, is because I guess
this is totally going to turn into a financial podcast.
I'm sorry, I can't avoid it. And then the other thing too that makes it so different is it's not centralized. It's not owned by any government or any treasury of a government. It attains its value only by the agreement, essentially, of the people who use it. So I won't go any deeper. I'm done with my financial explanation. But I think that leads us into the next thing we wanted to talk about, which is the mentality of it's some new thing.
Yes.
And I think you had some thoughts on that too.
Yeah. Just that mindset. It reminded me of Acts 17 and the philosophers in Athens. And when it describes those folks in Acts 17 and verse 21, it says, "For all the Athenians and the foreigners who were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing." That mindset is infectious with most people.
It has its appeal.
It's the new shiny thing, whatever it is. I mean, just for example, if you asked young people, do you want to invest in, Ma Bell, AT&T, or Dogecoin? And they're going to be like, why would I ever invest in AT&T? They gravitate towards the new thing. Now, to come closer to spiritual matters, on our YouTube channel, we have probably hundreds of videos now. Sermons, we have daily videos, we have all sorts of things. And a few weeks ago, I took a break from the daily videos for personal reasons, and someone, I'll have people saying, "Oh, you're not putting out a new video every day." It's like, no, I'm taking a break. But what I want to say is, there's hundreds of videos on there. You don't always have to have a new video every day.
Right.
And, people will hear a sermon and they'll say, "Oh, we've heard that before." There's nothing new under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
But people just have this mindset. We have to have the new thing. You want an old car or a new? I want a new car. You want an old house? Or I want a new house. Do you want the old gospel, or do you want a new doctrine? I want a new doctrine, and it's a mindset. And you see that, I think, with what we're talking about, just the mindset. It's the new thing.
Right. And, it's not to say that everything that's new is bad, because
Correct.
Everything was once new.
Because they heard Paul talking about the resurrection, and they're like,
that was new to them.
We've never heard this.
Yep.
And it turns out to be the truth.
Right.
It is a good thing. Now, not all new things are good, but some new things are, and the gospel, was new. It was new to them, at least, and they did need to listen.
Yeah. The lesson in that is something shouldn't be adopted just because it's new. Something is not good simply by the fact that it is the new thing. It takes examining a thing to see what it's made of, to see what the point of it is, to understand if it's going to be worthwhile or not. And that's what the Athenians did, is some mocked, some rejected, and some said, "We want to hear more about this. We want to hear you on this later." They took a more critical eye, but they were willing to scope out this new thing, in this case the gospel, to say, is this worth my time or not?
Yeah. And that concept of some mocked, and that, I mentioned in the intro, the CEO of JP Morgan, who said, "Well, Bitcoin's nothing." Well, I think that ETF is, I can't remember what it's trading for now. Anyway, it's some huge number. Bitcoin's trading for some huge number. But here's a fellow who has completely discounted it, and he has his reasons, and it's like, that's fine, whatever. But just that idea of someone discounting something that other people believe in.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that in Athens. Some people mocked. And it's like, so some people have that mindset where some people just, they're not going to believe in it. Thinking about the gospel, thinking about the Lord's call to repent. And in my notes, I jotted down when the angels come to Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot is there, and Lot has his family there, and he has his daughters and his son-in-laws, and Lot goes to speak to the son-in-laws out in the field, and they thought he was joking, and they ended up dying there. But just that concept, and I mean, Andrew, you've done it. I mean, you talk to people about the gospel, and they're like, "You really believe that? You're a smart guy." It's like, you went to university, you're educated, and you actually believe in the Bible? What are you, an idiot? I mean, is that fair to say? I know that sounds kind of harsh, but that's some people's view.
I mean, yeah, some people would take the view that, no critically thinking person could still believe in Scripture. They just dismiss it out of pocket.
And not to turn this into a financial podcast, but like how you describe Bitcoin. Well, it's just digital currency. You want to guess what the dollar is anymore?
It's certainly not backed by any gold standard, but that's a whole other thing that
it's not
don't
like,
get started.
It's not like the bank is sitting there like Scrooge McDuck with millions and millions and millions of dollars in their bank vault. Anymore, it is digital. It is digital. That's what it is. So to come along and mock the whole idea of a digital currency is nothing. It somewhat doesn't understand how things are working. For someone to come along and mock the gospel and the truth and to just discount it out of hand shows they really don't understand what's going on. And as we look at Scripture, and we just know there are people who will discount it. There are people who will not believe it. There are people who will mock it. There have always been people who have mocked it. So be it. That's where we are as the proverb says, buy the truth and sell it not.
Right.
And you might, you think about that concept, buy the truth and sell it not. And while we're talking about investing, with every investment, there's a time to buy and a time to sell, right? I mean, that's investing.
Yep.
Some people buy it and they never sell it. And anyway, that's a whole nother story. But the way investing works is there's a time to buy and there's a time to sell. Not with the gospel. You buy it and you never sell it. It's the ultimate investment. And that's the picture that's used in Proverbs. Buy the truth and sell it not. Okay, other things concerning like the mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so why are people... Okay, so we've talked about some people, it's just a new thing, right? Why are people getting into it?
Yeah, so based on, we've been using cryptocurrency as sort of a metaphor for investing in the gospel. You might be led to think that we're all in favor of it, but now we're going to get to maybe some more critical comparisons. I think one of the big ones you see of people who are deep into the world of cryptocurrency and this sort of high stakes investing world is it's an attempt to make a lot of money really quickly. It's trying to get rich quick, and I think it's especially prevalent in a way. It's sort of become popularized in media that young people are consuming. A lot of influencers and people online are talking about investment, talking about cryptocurrency, and they're sort of putting this image in front of people of you can get rich, you can have the nice house, the nice cars, you can have all of the lifestyle of a rich person without really doing any work. The whole day trading or crypto trading, it's kind of a way to side skirt the typical path of working for a living and working to try to sustain yourself.
Verse in Proverbs that comes to mind with that point. This is Proverbs 20, verse 21. An inheritance gained hastily at the beginning will not be blessed at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I understand there are spiritual things being spoken about. That idea of getting rich quickly. We have all seen news stories about people who win the lottery. And the percentages of people who win the lottery and are bankrupt within a year is staggering. That statistic is just amazing. Whatever it is. I mean, it's high. I can't remember offhand what it is. But the idea of getting rich quickly, it appeals to people.
It does. It drives a lot of people, and it's a promise that for people who actually obtain it by fortune, by luck, most people will find that the happiness that it buys is short-lived. And I can't say that from experience of one who's struck it rich just immediately, but from examples, from seeing it in people who have.
Yeah, and I know I think you had pulled up some of the other verses about as riches increase. Oh, how does the verse go? As riches increase, it increases those who consume them, or something along those lines.
Yeah, in Ecclesiastes 5 verse 10, Solomon writing about. He tried wealth. He tried the acquisition of goods. He says, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This is also vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. And he ends by saying, and what advantage has the owner but to see them with his eyes? So the ways in which your money is required of you and drained from you increases with more wealth comes more problems, more issues, more headache.
And that idea of it increases those who consume them. And I mean, you'll hear sports stars talking about this, and you'll hear lottery winners talking about this, where all of a sudden you have people coming out of the woodwork looking for their cut. And eventually it's gone. And it's not a good thing. An inheritance gained hastily. There's something to be said about work and hard work.
Right.
And people who want to get rich quickly, it's a love of money, and sometimes they get exactly what they want, but don't put your trust in riches because they are fleeting.
Right.
As assuredly Solomon
when you
wrote.
think of it, what are the two outcomes? If you put everything in some sort of gambling investment, some sort of high risk investment like cryptocurrency. What are your two outcomes? Well, you could not be lucky and you've lost everything and you've made a difficult situation for yourself, or you get rich, you get the wealth, but then there's nothing gained from it. So either situation is not bettering your life if that's what you're after. There has to be something more that you're living for than just trying to increase your net worth.
Yeah. And like the first verse you read, those who desire to be rich, they're not going to be satisfied with riches. And they just won't be. It doesn't bring happiness. It doesn't bring righteousness. It doesn't bring contentment. It doesn't bring any of those things.
And that's exactly why when Jesus talks about in Matthew chapter 5, don't lay up treasures on earth where thieves break in and steal, rust destroys, moth destroys. Lay up treasures in heaven. He's saying that there has to be something other than your earthly monetary gain that drives you, because those things are not going to last. And when we're talking about digital currency, the rate at which it may not last can be greatly accelerated.
Yep, very much so. Other mentalities and mindsets that I wanted to think about with this concept. One of the places where you're seeing Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies take hold is in third world countries, Africa, South America. It seems like there was a news story a few weeks ago. One of visits somewhere in Central America, where one of those countries was actually going to make Bitcoin their official currency, if I'm remembering correctly. And it makes you ask the question, why is that happening? In some of the countries, it's a good thing. Some, maybe it's not a good thing. Anyway, that's speculative.
Sure.
But there is, in countries that lack stability, when their economy is lacking stability, some of those countries are going this route because, frankly, the government in place, well, it's just not stable. And people do not trust the government. And people do not trust the government's monetary vehicles, right. However you want to put it.
It's the kind of thing where in countries where, say, the government's currency has huge inflation issues, right. You can't buy a loaf of bread with yesterday's wages. Right. In that instance, something like a decentralized currency like right. cryptocurrency, it could be an alternate route if people are willing to accept it.
So now my question is that necessarily a bad thing? That idea of don't put your trust in the government, is that necessarily a bad thing? And I'm not sure it is.
I don't think it's always a bad thing. Because obviously, governments are human institutions, and governments can be wrong.
Right.
And there's governments who are clearly wrong in how they treat their citizens, and it would, they're oppressive, or they don't allow people to have to have basic, human rights. So in those cases, yeah, I'd say having some way to have some security that doesn't involve trusting the government can be beneficial. I wouldn't say that one should try to jump into it just because they distrust the government or just to be rebellious against the government.
Right.
That shouldn't be the motivator.
And I was just on my list. I was trying to think of why people are investing in cryptocurrency and just the mindset. So one of the things on my list, and we're going to come back to the lack of confidence in the government here in a second, but some people are doing it, I think, for one thing, to conceal illicit gains. I know, what was the website that the Silk Road? The drug trading website,
dark web website where you can trade in drugs and such and other things, and
that idea of, because Bitcoin is blockchain and encrypted and they're hoping nobody can track it. Well, it turns out maybe people can track it, but anyway, that's another story.
Yeah.
But the idea of trying to hide crimes, frankly, and it just reminded me is it in Romans 2:16, where it talks about, let me get over there. This is Romans 2:16. In the day when God will judge the secrets of men, by Jesus Christ. It's like there is nothing secret that will not be revealed.
Sure.
You can hide stuff from the government. You can hide stuff from your fellow man. You can hide stuff from your family. You ain't hiding anything from God. It's not going to happen. But that's one reason that people are investing in this. I'm not saying everybody who invests in it is doing that.
No, and not to say either that the vehicle of cryptocurrency itself, if you buy into it, doesn't mean you're condoning or buying into illegal activity. It's just a way that people have taken advantage of it. People
have been using the American dollar for illicit means for a long time.
Absolutely.
Just because you use cash. And let's go ahead and look in Romans 13. Romans 13, in talking about submitting to government. And I think this ties in with what we're talking about. This is Romans 13, verse 1. Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God. The authorities that exist are appointed by God. A little bit later in the passage, it says, you be subject to them, verse 5, because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for they are God's ministers, attending continually to this very thing. I have a feeling some people are investing in crypto, and they're using it to evade taxes, somewhat as money laundering and things like that. It very clearly says in Scripture, pay your taxes.
Sure.
One of the accusations against Jesus, they said, he says we don't have to give taxes to Caesar. That was a lie. He says just the opposite. You give to Caesar what is Caesar's. But back to the first point about not trusting your government. Does that mean you don't submit to the government? That's not what that means. But if you recognize, we know people who the church here, for example, supports in Zimbabwe, and they have sky-high inflation, runaway inflation. And it's in those places and other places in similar situations where they're realizing you can't count on the government. And I'm not saying everybody should go out and buy crypto. It's not what I'm saying.
Not financial advice.
I'm saying the kingdoms of men rise and fall.
Yes.
And don't put your trust in the kingdoms of men.
Yes.
Don't put your trust in crypto either. Put your trust in the Lord.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's the things that people cling to. And when people are afraid or when people are unsure in their lives, they'll cling to different things. And some people put their trust in their political leaders or their government, and it's going to step in and save them. Whether it's a ideological figurehead of a leader or just the government as a whole. Other people turn to, I'm going to trust my retirement savings. I'm going to trust my 401k. I'm going to hope the stock market keeps going up. It's the kinds of things that any one of those things could give you some benefit for a while, but all of those things are not going to help you beyond this life, and they're not going to continue with you. So it's the same story. It's the same lesson for all of them.
Yeah, very much so. Bitcoin could go to $1 million. When you die, how much do you get to take with you? None of it. You don't get to take money with you. You don't get to take houses with you. You don't get to take anything with you. And therefore, you better lay up for yourself in heaven. Just thinking about mindsets, mentalities. And I wonder do you think part of it is everybody's doing it? And it's just you don't want to miss the bandwagon.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure that's motivated plenty of people to at least dip their toes into it. I wondered about disclosing or not on the podcast. I actually do hold a little bit of cryptocurrency myself.
You're fired.
So guilty, I suppose.
I do not. I have remained pure and clean. So I'm innocent in all these matters.
John's going to hold to the barter system and keep trading goats for chickens. And
I would never trade goats for chickens.
I mean, I might say that,
chickens for goats. Don't you know the exchange rate?
What is it? 10 chickens to a goat? I don't know. Anyway.
But just the idea of everybody's doing it.
Oh, yeah.
And like I said, it's now in some ways, it's like that's kind of what investing is. You're following, you're following statistics and things like that. But as we think about the gospel, and some people have the idea, the mentality towards church. And, which church do you go to? Well, you go to the most popular one. You go to the biggest one. You go to the fanciest one. You go to the newest one. And that is not what we base our decision on.
Mm-hmm.
As we think about the broad path that leads to destruction. That's the way everybody else is going. Narrow is the way that leads to eternal life, and there are few who find it. When they come to Jesus and they say, are there few who are saved? And to paraphrase what Jesus says, he says yes. It's not very many. It's never been very many. It's always the remnant. So just in thinking about mindsets that people have, it's easy to follow the crowd.
Sure.
And that's all some people do. They just follow the crowd.
Yeah.
And if you do that in spiritual matters, you'll end up going to hell if you follow the crowd.
Mm.
Not to put it too bluntly, but that's what will happen. We have to be more discerning.
Sure.
We're not just looking for the newest thing. We're not looking for the shiniest thing. We're not, we're looking for something permanent. What other ideas should we think about, Andrew? Do you have anything else on your list?
I think that pretty much sums it up. I guess in way of summary, it's sort of another way of saying all things in moderation. The issues that can come out of something like cryptocurrency are when we become, and I can't think of another word other than saying we become too invested in the idea, or we become too fanatical about something.
We're consumed by our consumption.
Sure, yeah.
More or less.
It becomes this all-encompassing thing that takes up your time. It takes up your worry. It's what you are concerned with. You can't sleep at night because it jumped up 5% or it dropped 6%.
You are at its beck and call. It has become your idol.
It's become your idol. It's become your master. And as Christians, we have no other master but Jesus Christ. We have no other master but the Lord. So while we live in the world and we live by the mechanisms that the world uses to have money and to trade goods and to store wealth, we have to understand that we should not be slaves to those things. We should not be servants to the influencers who push those things because they're trying to make a quick buck too. Some of these joke or very, very new cryptocurrencies that come out, a lot of them are essentially scams. It's an attempt to pump and dump, and then whoever created it runs away with the profits. So we have to be careful, and we have to have all things in moderation.
Yep. I thought we might close out with this passage, and some of the things you just said touch on this a little bit. This is Proverbs chapter 1 at verse 10. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait to shed blood, let us lurk secretly for the innocent without cause, let us swallow them alive like Sheol and whole like those who go down to the pit, we shall find all kinds of precious possessions. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Cast in your lot among us. Let us all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your foot from their path, and for their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird, but they lie in wait for their own blood. They lurk secretly for their own lives. So are the ways of everyone who is greedy for gain. It takes away the life of its owners. And Solomon knew all about that.
Yep.
And as much wealth has been created through Bitcoin, Solomon was more wealthy. And he's the guy who ends up saying it's all vanity. It's grasping for the wind. And what matters is serving the Lord.
Right.
And there's a time to work, there's a time to not work. And all things serve the Lord.
Yeah. It's a matter of, are you working for your wealth, or is the point of wealth so that you can put it to work to serve others?
Yep.
The idea of wanting to have more, hopefully it's so that you can do more and you can serve more, not so that you can sit back and enjoy your spoils.
Yep, very much so. So what do you think, Andrew? That was our take on Bitcoin.
Kind of a weird one today, John.
But I thought it was a good discussion and just something I thought we could make some spiritual applications with. Hope you have a good week, Andrew.
Yep, same to you.
All right, appreciate everyone tuning in. Hope you tune in next week for another episode of Ears to Hear.